All right. So, let's see, the sound's working. Is the thing working? Yes. Great. So, before we start, just as a final reminder, for you guys in here, let me see. I did just pull it up. Um, our exam day is on Wednesday. In here at 8:30. So for us, it's regular. Oh, okay. Um, so it's just a regular day for us. That said, I am still here Thursday and Friday. If for some reason Wednesday doesn't work for you guys, but like it's specifically blocked out so that you guys would have that time available. And since it's literally our normal time period, it usually works best for that particular class. But again, like if something comes up and you got to come in Thursday or Friday, just let me know. I'll be here. Um, and for my online students, because I do have two online classes I'm recording for today, the test will be up on Blackboard pretty much once I finish today. And you guys will have a week. And if you're not done by next Monday, you're out of luck because I got to get the grades in. I can't extend it beyond that. So get it done. That's all I got. Any questions for you guys? All good? All right. Let's go over the study guide. And just again as a reminder, this is not a cumulative exam, so it's just the third test essentially. I mean, I've even got written on the thing test 3 because it's usually test 3. All right, that's that. Oh, I don't use my red pen. All right. So starting with the top one. Immediately following the Civil War, what was the main focus of the U.S. government? This is going back to chapter 20, I think. Yeah, Empire and Wars. This is the start of chapter 20. So what was the main focus of the U.S. government immediately after the Civil War? Which is to say, pretty much from the, I mean, it technically goes back to the start of the semester, but we did talk about it in chapter 20, so it's fair game. Yes. Westward expansion. Yes. So, I mean, yeah, there was the whole Reconstruction thing, but, I mean, as we saw, the government was real lukewarm on that anyway, but when it came to actual, like, government involvement, it was all about heading west and opening up new lands, etc. All right. Okay, I don't have, there's not as many short answers as usual. At the beginning of American imperialism, what country was the main targeted market, I should say, for their industrial products? No, that comes later. That wasn't really a market we were trying to get into. We were trying to get into trade, well, sort of trade, um, with a country to pour all our industry into because we've got a lot of industrial products we're making. Yes, China, because big population, lots of people, lots of potential customers. Um, while imperialists were attempting to gain access to China, what island chain was taken over by white plantation owners and American Marines? Yes, this is when Hawaii was taken. Not formally added to the U.S. until a little bit later, but it was really just overthrown by business leaders. All right, let's see. So ahead of these economic incentives, the markets and the overthrowing governments, what was considered the first wave of American imperialism? What group of people typically went out and prepared these countries for later American involvement? Excuse me. It's not like a specific name of it. I mean, there is a group that was involved heavily in this, but this is more broad. It's a group of people that were involved in this. You could say profession, but I don't think they made a whole lot of money doing what they were doing. Let's see. Ahead of the economic incentives, what was the first wave of American imperialism? This was the group of people that went out before usually the businesses and the plantations and stuff and worked to prepare the populace for later American involvement. Because what they did, in addition to what they were supposed to be doing, also was exposing these people to like Western culture. Yes. Missionaries. I had a student in my other class. He was looking and he found it, but when he said it, he misspoke and said mercenaries, and it was very funny. It's like, no, not mercenaries. They weren't paid to go out and do this. They were just going out and doing it. All right. I think that's actually it for the economic, not beyond the economic incentives thing. However, we have various mindsets and individuals who were important in this imperial expansion. So, who wrote The White Man's Burden, which suggested that it was the burden of white men to spread the light of civilization to the rest of the world? The author of The White Man's Burden, which I'm pretty sure is also on my 104 test because we cover pretty similar periods around this time. Yeah, Rudyard Kipling. He did a lot of writing around this time. Let's see. What did Alfred Mahan think would undermine military security due to this group's supposed, quote, unwillingness to use force? There was a shifting of, I guess, culture around this time towards the end of the 1800s that concerned Mahan because he felt like this group was unwilling to use force. Yes, what specifically was Mahan worried about? I mean, it might have just been afraid of women, but yes, because if women got the right to vote, then they could vote to keep us out of wars that clearly we have to be in. And as we've seen, since the 1900s, we've not been in any wars. Yeah. All right. So finally for this, this is specifically referring to Mahan. I would not say Kipling was a member of this group. What was the name for those who felt war was necessary to maintain civilization and one's manhood? Yes. You pronounce that entirely correctly. Jingoist. Which the idea is jingoism, but the ones who believe it are jingoists. So yeah, either would work. All right, Cuba. There's a lot going on in Cuba, so this is going to be a lot of this part of the test. Okay. Against what country did Cuba fight their War of Independence? Who's Cuba fighting? Mm-hmm. Let's see. What was the main advantage that the Cuban rebels had over the Spanish? Oh. Hmm? Yes, because Cuba is basically a tropical island, and Spain is not. So if you're sending a bunch of boys from Spain into a tropical island, they're not going to enjoy that. Alrighty. Now, our gradual involvement in the war. In the War of 1898, which is what we call this war, what was the term for the type of journalism used by reporters covering the war? No, not that. That was last chapter. Yes, yellow journalism. They used atrocities to gain support for the war. Often, sometimes they would even make things up. Gasp. Yeah, yellow journalism. You sometimes still hear that today for like journalistic outlets that just focus on like the real dramatic stuff and not actually the story of what's going on. Just like, oh, these things happened that again may not have actually even happened. Now, you're thinking about the muckrakers. That was those were journalists, but they were trying to like uncover corruption and whatnot in businesses and the government. Okay. What was the event in February? Oh, sorry, on February 15th, 1898, which pushed America to war in Cuba? What was the big catalyst for us to finally get involved? Not that we needed to, but whatever. Yes, the main destruction of the Maine. Because, you know, Spain, which was already losing the war against Cuba, is totally going to piss off America. But, you know, whatever. It was a good excuse. All right. Uh, what was the name of the amendment which pledged to aid Cuban independence but limited its sovereignty afterwards? That's a later one. I'm looking for the one just before it. So, yes, the Teller Amendment. Yeah, I don't really. I mean, them being back to back doesn't help. but I don't really mention too much of the Platt Amendment in the notes, so I stick with the Taylor Amendment. I don't like having questions that are too similar for that reason. What else? What group did Teddy Roosevelt form and lead in the war in Cuba? The Rough Riders. Yeah, we literally had that last test, but I figured that we'd talk about it again since it's Teddy Roosevelt again. Why not? All right. What was the term for Cuba's diplomatic position with the United States immediately following the war? Because they certainly weren't independent, but they weren't like a conquered territory. They were kind of this weird middle ground. There's a specific diplomatic term for it. Britain did it a lot. It's right at the end of A Not So Free Cuba. Let me find the exact question. The term for Cuba's diplomatic position with the United States following their war. Well, their war for independence, not the war between the U.S. and Cuba. Yes, protectorate. Oops. I mean, because sort of technically they had sovereignty, but also they had to go through us for any kind of like foreign treaties or trade deals or whatever. So we were still very much holding quite a few reins. All right, I think that's it for Cuba. All right. And this goes back in the notes a little bit for the first one, and then there's immediately after. So, is this one the other page? No. What U.S. military leader defeated a flotilla in Manila Bay on May 1st, 1898? So this was during the same time as, really, I think before we even had troops in Cuba. George Dewey. I think he was a Commodore Dewey. No, I'm thinking Commodore Matthew Perry. Okay, and really following off from this, what island chain was later taken over by the United States around the same time as the Cuban War for Independence? So what other island chain did we acquire during this war? Well, sort of. We ended up having a war with these people anyway because they didn't want us there. Yeah, the Philippines. Let's see. All right. Panama. Things going on in Panama. I don't think I've got too much actually here. Oh no, I've got a couple of questions. Let's see. After Theodore Roosevelt became president, who suggested that the United States invest in a canal across the Isthmus of Panama? And technically, it was during McKinley's term, but McKinley didn't last very long. Yeah, the same guy as we had before, Alfred Mahan. He was, I want to say like Secretary of the Navy, maybe. He like took Roosevelt's position after Roosevelt left. Um, yeah. Anyway, what country did Roosevelt have to negotiate with in order to gain rights to build the Panama Canal prior to the independence movement, which he supported so that we could get the rights for cheaper? We didn't have to. We had to speak to Britain, but that wasn't the country that actually owned the land that was Panama, because Panama wasn't an independent country yet. Not France either. They were working on the canal. Colombia, yes. Because we did talk about England and France, but Colombia is the one that actually owned it and was the cause of a lot of concern when there was the independence movement. We're like, oh, we'll just support Panama and let them be independent if they let us build the canal. So after the Panama Canal was built, what did the U.S. president add to the Monroe Doctrine to signal that the U.S. intended to intervene in Western Hemisphere affairs? Good enough. Roosevelt Corollary. Man, this you don't need to be able to pronounce any of this. Don't worry about that. Roosevelt Corollary. Which again is just like an addition to the Monroe Doctrine that again in the question says that not only should you stay out of our business and we'll stay out of your business, but this is now specifically our business and we're going to get involved in all of their stuff. And boy, did we for quite some time. All right. Let's see. Let's start with China. Within China, what was the name of the nationalistic uprising which America helped to suppress so that we could gain a foothold there? Yes, the Boxer Rebellion. Which, by the way, is fascinating. I studied a bit more about it when I took like a modern China class. It could have been the new government of China, at least for a little while, because China's not real good about having stable governments. Let's see. In 1904 to 1905, what country did Japan defeat in order to gain international prestige? Yes. Oops. If I spell it right. Oh. So, following Japan's war with Russia, what American president helped to settle the peace terms before sending the U.S. fleet on something of a victory lap? So who was the president that helped to broker the peace between Japan and Russia? It was Roosevelt again. He's still around. He's still doing stuff. All right. I'm going to stick this here because technically it's before World War One. So before we get into World War One, what country did the United States have diplomatic tensions with, which resulted in a failed raid across national borders? And as I told my previous class, it's across national borders, so that narrows it down quite a bit. Between the U.S. and what country? Um, there were diplomatic tensions between the U.S. and a country before World War One. No, this was they're sending a raid across the national borders, which would imply a border between the U.S. and this country. So there's only really two options. Mexico. It's either Mexico or Canada. And we haven't messed with Canada since 1812. So. Yeah, there was the whole thing with Pancho Villa. All right. Actually, I think that's it for that. Oh, that's it for that whole. That one on the floor. Okay. That's it for that page. All right, on to World War One. Where are we at? Okay. So, what event sparked World War One in Europe? What's that? Sorry, I couldn't understand you. Was it Lusitania? This was before the Lusitania.
Assassination of Archduke.
Yes, Archduke who? Last name? Yeah. Well done. A there. E there. Yeah, Franz Ferdinand, who was the second in line to the throne of Austria, and that caused a whole diplomatic thing and pulled everybody into a war. All right. During the Great War, the British used a blockade against the Central Powers. How did the Germans respond? How did the Germans fight back against the blockade?
They used U-boats.
Yes, U-boats. Because, I mean, it's real difficult to fight a British blockade. So you got to hit them with submarines. However, this led to other issues, such as the cruise liner that was sunk by the Germans, which prompted many Americans to call for war. And what was the name of this cruise liner?
Lusitania.
This is Lusitania. Let's see. What missive or telegram was one of the last tipping points towards America joining the First World War? What was the name of this telegram that was intercepted? And yeah, it's often called just the Zimmerman Note. At least that's what it was called when I was learning it. But the book says the Zimmerman telegram, so whatever. All right. I think that's it for before the war. I mean, that was what got us in there. What event in Russia weakened the Allies and made the ending of the war that much harder? So what big event in Russia basically caused them to pull out of the war and made it much more difficult for everyone else to finish the war? Well, everyone else but Germany. Yeah, the Bolshevik Revolution. Because while they did attempt to continue fighting the war, they weren't doing a very good job because Russia's notorious for not being industrially capable. And they were having like a horribly huge civil war during this time that ended up killing more Russians than World War One. So yeah, they were busy. Okay. And we'll also mention here Wilson's hope for the lasting peace. So let's see. What was the main aspect of Wilson's 14 points which he felt would keep another world war from happening? This was just the part of the 14 points I said that you needed to remember. Yes. What was the main aspect of Wilson's 14 points that he felt would keep another world war from happening? There's, a bunch of different parts of the 14 points, but I said there was one specifically you needed to remember. It was like Wilson's big thing. Mm-mm. No, that was. This is like as the war's ending, he pulls this together. What's that? Um, yes. What would this be called? Yes, League of Nations, which again is or was a just like a prototype United Nations. However, while this did get ratified in Europe, who led the anti-treaty action against Wilson and the United States? So who was the guy here in the U.S. that was fighting to keep the treaty from being signed because of various reasons, some of which I get, but, you know. Who led the anti-treaty action here in the U.S.? I don't really know his last name. Yeah, Henry Cabot Lodge. And it ended up driving Wilson to basically give himself a stroke trying to convince the American people we should sign this thing. All right. A couple things here before we get to the next chapter. Let's see. Who was in charge of the Food Administration in the U.S. and said that children planting vegetable gardens was, quote, just as real and patriotic an effort as the building of ships or the firing of cannon? Hoover! Sure, we've never heard of this guy before. And towards the end of the war, what do we have here? Yeah, what two acts passed by Congress in 1917 and 1918 were used to keep people from speaking out against the draft or expressing any ideals that were seen as un-American? Mm-hmm. There's two. What's the other one? Sedition. This is fine. Espionage and Sedition Acts, which again were literally used like back in the War of 1812. So they just kind of brought back some old laws. I think that's really all I have for that. Everything else is just kind of post-war. So, oh no, communism's scary. Let's talk about that. Let's see. What was the name for the general fear of communism overrunning America? Red Scare. I'm just looking at some of my multiple choice, and I have some really dumb answers. All right. In response to the Red Scare, and I mean technically like a series of bombings, so kind of fair. What series of legal crackdowns saw American liberty suspended for the sake of safety from these communist threats? As I put it before, this is McCarthyism before McCarthy. So what was these series of legal crackdowns called? Named after the guy that got them started.
The Abrams case?
It's not Abrams. It's not a specific case. It's a series of things. I can't say too much because it's literally part of the word or part of the answer, and that'd give it away. What's that? Yeah, there was a guy specifically who he was the um, Attorney General of the U.S. and he caused this series of legal crackdowns to try to get rid of these communists. Yes, Palmer raids. That's what I was saying. If I say raids, that'll narrow it down a lot. But that's what it was. It was just a bunch of, they were kicking down doors, and anybody that was even sort of socialist was targeted, including, as we saw in some of the pictures, the IWW, because can't have trade unions, that's communism. Speaking of the Palmer raids, after the series of anti-communist raids, so after the Palmer raids, what group was formed in order to protect American liberties and freedoms from government overreach and overreactions? So what group was created to oppose these kind of...
ACLU?
Yeah, do you know the full name?
American Civil Liberties Union?
Yes. It's usually just called the ACLU, and that's fair. That's fine. I just wanted to make sure you had the whole thing. Well done. Okay. I think I've got one more here. Oh no, I don't talk about. Oh no. Okay, yeah. This was during this time period. I somehow just completely skipped the question. Who got in trouble for saying the draft was a form of slavery and was sentenced to 10 years in prison, though he was pardoned after 3? This is a guy we've talked about a couple of times previously in the semester. I asked you to write a fantastic paper on it. It was very good. He was arrested for saying that the draft was a form of slavery. Eugene V. Debs. We talked about him back in the labor unions chapter. All right. Now I think that's it for that. Oops. I missed that entirely. However, we had one other thing going on in 1918 specifically. More devastating than the Great War itself, what natural disaster hit in 1918, killing 50 to 100 million people worldwide? Yes. What was it called? Well, yeah, it was just on the test. It's just an influenza pandemic. Woo. Yeah. It was also called the Spanish flu because the Spanish were the first to report about it, but we don't really call it that much in this class, so that's not what's on the test. All right. Yay, racism. This one skips around a little bit because, like, thematically, the Klan would definitely fit in here. But that's a little bit later in the notes, so I'm just gonna stick it all here. In what city did the worst racial violence known as the Red Summer occur? Chicago. Because, I mean, it happened all over, but Chicago was the one that was considered the worst, or at least it was where it started. Let's see what we have. Okay. Where was the Klan refounded in the 1920s? Where was the Klan refounded in the 1920s? They had technically been disbanded before, but it really goes away. So they were reformed in the 1920s at what specific location? Oh, Stone Mountain, right outside Atlanta, Georgia. And as I said, there's still like a big old monument there for some reason. All right. And one more thing. What were the two symbols of the KKK after their refounding? What was the two things they used as, like, or what was considered their symbols? I mean, they had a lot of symbolism, but yes, American flag, because they're so patriotic, and the burning cross, because they hate anybody that's not the correct kind of Christian, and anyone that's not Christian. So yeah, they branched out a little bit in this time period. Okay, economy. Let's see, we have really nothing left over here. So, who was the Secretary of Commerce who pushed for the American plan who pushed for the American plan, which was tying health insurance and pension plans to jobs in order to weaken unions? It's over again. Hey, look, he's back. And technically, we would have mentioned him again earlier, but I didn't talk about the FBI, so this was his other job after the FBI. What was the name of the scandal which saw government officials divvying out land to the Mammoth Oil Company in exchange for under-the-counter cash? Teapot Dome. Which was like the name of the national park, I believe, that this was happening in. Oh, Hoover should have been down here in the, sorry, if you're actually following along and using the study, for God's sake. If you're following along and using the study guide, it's supposed to be down here. I'm just going to write Hoover a second time because that's not working. Hoover. There. Yeah, anyway. There are some other stuff. There is some other stuff up here, though. What automaker perfected the assembly line, which helped to push the second industrial revolution in the United States? Henry Ford. Because again, he did not invent the car. He did not invent the assembly line, but he put them together and made it work. All right. And since we're talking about loans to Germany, with Europe and especially Germany hard-pressed to repay war loans, what system of revolving door loans, which is a great idea, did the United States set up to get recovery funds flowing? So what was this system of loans that was sent to Germany so that Germany could repay France and Britain, and so that France and Britain could repay us? Well, his name is in the answer, yes. Yeah, the Dawes Plan. Different from the Dawes Act, which, excuse me, sorry, we talked about earlier this semester with cutting up native land. This is a completely different Dawes. All right. Okay, the systems that attacked the unions, that was the American plan under Hoover. Here we are. Where did real estate speculation boom in the 1920s, only to crash after storms caused land values to drop in 1926 and 1928?
Hollywood?
It wasn't Hollywood, because Hollywood, the land is very expensive there still. This was speculation. People spent a lot of money buying land, and then storms happened. Florida. Yeah, if we're talking about storms, it's probably Florida. Although I guess we did talk about Galveston, Texas last time. Is that it for this section? Yeah, because we get to this next. Yeah, okay, cool. We're making good time. All right. Is that for? Yeah, cool. What was the belief that the Bible was meant to be read literally, which was a response to changing moral values in the United States? And it's had its hold on the southeastern U.S. for decades now. The idea that the Bible was meant to be read literally. What is that called? I will respond in just a moment. The idea is fundamentalism. The people were fundamentalists. So, yeah, close enough. Fundamentalism. It's the fundamentals of just. Surely the Bible can't have allegory, even though, like, most of the stuff Jesus did was allegory. Like, all the parables, that's literally allegory. That's like, these aren't things that happen, but this will be a good allegory for what you should do. But whatever. Let's see. What scientific idea became a problem for the fundamentalists? culminating in a court case in Dayton, Tennessee. What scientific idea do they have a problem with? Yes, evolution. And who wrote On the Origin of Species, which caused said previous issue? Charles Darwin. Which I think. No, I'm thinking my other my European history course. We talk about Charles Darwin and Charles Dickens kind of back to back. All right. So the Great Depression. Who was the president at the start of the Great Depression? Who was in office when everything went south? The notes aren't going to specifically say that when we talk about the two elections, and then who was in power at the end of chapter 21? Yeah. It was Hoover again. Of course it was Hoover. Excuse me. And what event on October 29th, 1929, began the Great Depression in America and consequently the rest of the world? Stock market crash. And that's it. We're done really early, which is fine. I've got a lot of crap I've got to do. Speaking of which, hey online students, I am working on getting everything graded. I will have it done as soon as I can. And for you guys, I'm working on the papers as well, so I'll get those online when I can. Any questions? Everybody set? All right. Like I said, the test for you guys is Wednesday. Again, for my online students, I'll be putting it up soon, but try to get it done as soon as you can, because if Blackboard crashes out over the weekend, we can't do anything about it.